Hi, I'm Stan Smith, and as I introduce myself, for a number of years I've had a prophetic ministry, but I want to go back to my beginnings, which happened, I was a teenager, and it was on my 15th birthday that I asked Jesus Christ to come into my heart. And the real issue was I sensed that God had a purpose for my life, and that I couldn't possibly fulfill that purpose without having Him live in me. I felt that whatever shortcomings were in me would be made up for if Jesus came and lived inside of me. And, if you've never asked Jesus to come and live in you and you're trying to go it alone, then my guess is that you're finding life pretty maddening, pretty baffling, and pretty confusing sometimes. And there maybe are days when you feel like you're on top of things, but things get away from us, don't they? But in any event, asking Jesus to come in was the best thing I ever did. Well, I knew there was a call to ministry in my life, and I never imagined that it would be a prophetic ministry because, first off, I thought prophetic people were incredibly spiritual, and I knew that I wasn't. And so it seemed to me like prophetic people were just way, way up there in the things of God. And admittedly, some of them are, but I've met a few prophets who seem to be pretty ordinary folks. There's a verse in James, around chapter 5, toward the end of the chapter, where James says that Elijah was a man of like passions as you and me. In other words, he was a pretty ordinary man. And the thing that kind of drew me to him when I was a teenager was that if there's anybody in the Bible that had a prophetic word that came to pass right away, it was Elijah. And I think young men are drawn to Elijah. We like his power, we like his kind of no-compromise attitude, and there's something in us that says, yeah, I want to be on fire for God like Elijah. And perhaps there's something in his calling that resonates with many of us, and we sense, yeah, I want to get to know God that way. And if so, then I think Elijah has made a huge contribution to the body of Christ because he's awakened in us an awareness somebody out there can hear the voice of God and can speak for God. I'd like to be a person like that. And if you have that kind of desire in your heart, well, only Christ in you can get you to a place where you'll see any of those things coming to pass. But anyway, the thing that I want to just take one little vignette from the story of Elijah, because when I was a young man, I wish I had learned this a little earlier than I did, because I wasted a lot of time theologizing a story of something that happened to Elijah. And I'll put on my glasses so I can read. And I'm going to read just a few lines here from 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah had gone to a cave and he was pouring out his heart to God and he was going through some things. And then God said in verse 11, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and a strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces. Well, now, I read that when I was a teenager, and here was the sense that God was speaking to Elijah. Elijah's waiting for this big word, and the big word is go somewhere else. And Elijah got up and he went, and when he went, then God went by and did something. And there was something in me that thought, no, it doesn't have to be that way. That doesn't make sense to me. Why would God tell Elijah to go over there when God was right here talking to Elijah in the first place? Why was it necessary to have two steps in that equation? That didn't make any sense to me. So if I sensed that God was telling me to go over there, well, I didn't go because I thought, I don't have to go over there. God's right here. Well, okay, I was pretty clever, wasn't I? I sure missed a lot. Because here's what happens. A lot of times God will speak to you, and I call this little dance, I call it the two-step. What God will do is He will speak step one to you. And if you are faithful to act on step one, God will be faithful to give you step two. But if you don't act on step one, step two never happens. I don't know how many steps two did not happen in my life because I was so clever. I said, I don't have to do that. God can meet me right here. Well, you know what? There are times when God will say, go to that meeting, go to that conference, I'm going to talk to you there. And we get into this we're a little more spiritual than God sort of mode, and we tell him, oh no, I don't have to do that. You can speak to me in my prayer closet. And you know what? He can speak to you in your prayer closet. And he proved it to you, because when you were in your prayer closet, he said, go to the conference. And so if you don't go to the conference, let me tell you something. There's something you're just not going to hear. Now, will God try to speak to you again? I don't know. You know, I hear theologians who want to make sure that no one feels left out, no one's feelings are hurt, and so they say, oh, well, God will speak to you again and again. And frankly, I have to say God has been very patient with me, even though I've been kind of blockheaded at times. He's been patient with me, and he has spoken to me again and again. And God is a God of loving kindness and a God of patience. But you know what? There are times when if you're not at the station with a ticket in your hand, you are going to miss the train. It's that simple. Does that mean there will be another train tomorrow? There may be. But I'll tell you what. If we want to be people who are led by the Spirit, we begin to train ourselves to respond. And if God says, I don't want to meet you here, I want to meet you somewhere else, so you go stand over there, if that's what God says, we learn to do that. There was a time when God did that with Jeremiah. And what he said to Jeremiah was, he said, now you go down to the potter's house, and I'm going to speak to you there. And so Jeremiah went to the potter's house, and when he got there, frankly, what God spoke to him at the potter's house, I look at that, and God could have said that to Jeremiah when he'd stayed home. He could have said, just imagine that the potter made something and it wasn't turning out right. So he would clump up the clay, wouldn't he? And Jeremiah would say, yes, Lord. He'd clump up the clay and he'd start over. And God would say, and so I can do that with people or with nations if they will come to me. And Jeremiah could have heard all of that without going to the potter's house. But you know what? That's not what God said to him. That dance was a two-step. And if Jeremiah wouldn't do step one, he wasn't going to get step two. Now, I find that God leads me this way again and again. He doesn't always tell me every step that he wants to lead me in. But what he will do is he will give me one step. And if I respond to that first step, then he does something with the second step. One time I went to a church and I had this little shred of a word of knowledge that actually I'd been carrying for a few days. I'd seen kind of a picture of a woman in a yellow dress, and I'd looked for a woman with a yellow dress for a few days, and I discovered women don't wear yellow dresses anymore, I guess. I don't know. I didn't see a woman with a yellow dress anywhere. Till I got to a large church that was kind of conservative, and I was preaching there for the first time, and I wanted to be on my best behavior. I wanted them to be impressed with me and think I was wonderful and want me to come back. But what do you know? There in the choir was the woman in the yellow dress. And so I remember standing up to speak, and I remember thinking, now, maybe I should just play it safe and forget about the woman in the yellow dress and just bring a nice message and not rock the boat. And I stood there, and I saw that woman with the yellow dress about 4 or 5 rows back, and I even said it aloud. Shall I play it safe, or shall I step out? And everyone looked at me blankly because they didn't know me, and I thought, well, I've got to step out. I said, you there in the yellow dress, and I pointed kind of off to the side there. I said, you there in the yellow dress. I said, you have a ministry of mercy. And I poured out this word that the Lord had given me for the woman in the yellow dress. And then here came the pastor. And as I say, I'd never preached in that church before. And he came reaching for the microphone. I thought, oh boy, I've blown it now. And I thought maybe this church doesn't go for that kind of thing. And now I'm in trouble. But he took the microphone. When he did, he says, now listen, folks. There's some people that get flaky out there, but there's a real thing. He says, and this brother has the real thing. And in my heart I said, whew. And he says, now sis, you stand up. He says, what were you and I talking about Sunday afternoon after church? Wasn't I telling you that you have a ministry of mercy? And now this man that's never laid eyes on you before in your life is telling you the very same thing I told you on Sunday afternoon. Sis, do you think God wants you to pay attention to that and take that seriously? He wants you to be encouraged. And I was standing there just heaving a great sigh of relief. Now, what happened is, after I ministered the word, there was altar ministry that went on for, oh goodness, at least an hour. My wife and I both together were ministering to people. But you see, it was a two-step. If I had not taken the one step, then the rest of what God wanted to do probably would not have happened, because that's the way God does things. And somehow our obedience, our loving Him and honoring Him enough to act on what He's telling us, seems to be part of the equation. In other words, God doesn't give Elijah the whole revelation unless Elijah is willing to take that first step and do one very small, simple thing. I mean, it was not a big deal for Elijah to get up and to get out of the mouth of the cave and go to that place on the side of the mountain. That was not a big deal. But if Elijah couldn't do the little thing, why should God entrust him with the larger revelation? And so, in my own life, there have been a few times when I've hit it, and there have been a few times when I've missed it. And again, when I've missed it, it's because I didn't do step one, and therefore I never got to step two.
Watching the wind